Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving into something truly fascinating, presented by Dr. Christophe Delong and Kenexa. We're going to be looking at bobsleigh. But listen, I don't want you to just think of this as some quirky winter sport that pops up on TV every 4 years. No, we're looking at this as a masterclass in extreme human physiology and ultimately as a really powerful metaphor for how we master chaos using tools like Kenexa. It is an absolutely incredible journey of human endurance, so strap in.
So, you know how people always call bobsleigh Formula One on ice? It's a catchy phrase, right? It immediately makes you think of sleek aerodynamics and just blistering speed. But honestly, I've got to push back on that comparison right out of the gate, because unlike a Formula One driver who's safely strapped into a high-tech bucket seat, the bobsleigh athlete is doing something way more intense. The bobsleigh isn't just a vehicle. It's a rapidly accelerating, highly volatile laboratory testing the absolute frontiers of what the human body and brain can actually withstand.
Okay, let's dive into this. This quote right here perfectly captures the terrifying reality of the sport. For the athletes inside, this is literally a 60-second fight for survival, packed inside a confined metal cell measuring just 3.8 meters. Every single muscle, every neural pathway, every reflex, it's all stretched to the absolute breaking point just to get to the finish line intact. But before we get into the sheer, mind-bending physics of the modern sport, we kind of need to understand where this madness actually came from. All right, Section 1, the origins of bobsleigh, from aristocratic leisure to gladiatorial sport. It all started back in 1864 with this visionary hotelier named Caspar Badrit in St. Moritz, Switzerland. He essentially bet his British clients that winter in the Alps could actually be fun. Well, the bored Victorian tourists accepted, but they quickly got tired of just walking around in the snow in their tweed suits. So by 1887, they literally started tying local delivery sleds together to bomb down the narrow village streets. To gain speed, they'd violently rock back and forth, which is a motion they called bobbing. It was totally unregulated, incredibly dangerous, and chaotic. In fact, it wasn't until the 1932 Lake Placid Olympics, on a track so terrifying it caused international panic, that major safety pivots and rules were finally forced onto the sport. Moving on to Section 2, biomechanics and the initial explosion. That brings us right into the modern era, and to the start of the race, the initial explosion. Everything, and I mean absolutely everything, is decided in the first 50 meters of the track. This is where athletes have to completely defy inertia. It requires a biological explosion that combines the raw sprint speed of an Olympic track star with the sheer brute power of an elite weightlifter. Just highlight this massive number in your mind for a second. 340 kilograms. That is the dead weight of a two-man bobsleigh and its crew sitting completely motionless on the ice. They have to move this colossal mass from a dead standstill with explosive, flawless precision. To even have a shot at being competitive, the crew needs to reach 40 kilometers per hour in a mere 5 seconds. 5 seconds. This demands what biomechanists call a triple extension. The athletes must explosively extend their ankles, their knees, and their hips in perfect, synchronized concert, all while bent over at a 15 to 20 degree angle just to maximize their horizontal force. It's an astonishing burst of anaerobic power. But here's the catch. How do you push that hard when you're standing on slippery ice? Well, this number is the key. 500. That's the number of tungsten microspikes on the bottom of a single athlete's shoe. These tiny spikes, spaced just millimeters apart, have to pierce the ice exactly 2 to 3 millimeters deep. No more, no less. It's an absolutely critical detail. Without that exact grip, all that explosive human horsepower would just result in slipping, and the horizontal force transfer would completely fail. Now, there's a really fascinating contrast in roles happening here. The pusher is delivering 100% maximum explosive muscle. They are the roaring engine of the sled. But the pilot, they only push at about 70 to 80%. Why on earth would they hold back? Well, because the pilot has to preserve their neural endurance. Even though they're pushing less, their heart rate is actually higher, peaking at 185 beats per minute before they even sit down. That's because their brain is already racing, mentally mapping the precise anticipatory reflexes they're going to need to survive the descent. Which brings us to Section 3, Physiology and Extreme Survival, the Human Chassis. Right, so survival is exactly what this descent phase is all about, because once they jump into the sled, the athlete's bodies stop actively moving and they have to immediately transform. They stop being sprinters, and they essentially become the human chassis. Imagine the sensory overload here. Inside that tiny sled, the human body must lock into total muscular isometry, becoming a rigid biological exoskeleton. In the steepest turns, these athletes are hit with 5G centrifugal forces. That means gravity is multiplied by 5. Suddenly, a normal 5-kilogram head plus the helmet feels like a 30-plus kilogram weight violently yanking on your neck. If your trapezius muscles aren't massively overdeveloped, your head literally crushes forward against your chest.
So the crucial point here is understanding the invisible enemies they're fighting all the way down. Remember, there is zero suspension in a bobsleigh. None. Every tiny imperfection in the ice violently transfers directly into the athlete's spines at a frequency of 15 to 40 hertz. They suffer up to 12 G vertical kicks during track transitions. Their core muscles are firing in constant involuntary microcontractions just to hold their spines together. Over time, this repeated trauma leads to what doctors actually call Bobsleigh syndrome, which is chronic headaches and spinal compression.
Okay, Section 4, Neurology. Flying blind. But surviving the physical trauma, that's only half the battle. Let's shift our focus to the brain. At speeds exceeding 140 kilometers per hour, human visual processing is just simply too slow. By the time your eyes see a curve and tell your hands to steer, it's too late. You've already crashed. So the pilot is essentially flying blind. And this brings us to a really critical concept, procedural memory. To navigate this impossible speed, pilots rely on an automated, learned schema. They memorize the track entirely on foot beforehand. During the actual race, they don't consciously think about driving. If they try to tap into their slow, conscious neocortex, it's game over. Instead, they completely rely on the basal ganglia, executing a flawless, automated symphony of muscle memory.
This quote perfectly illustrates what we call seat of the pants flying. The pilot's brain is literally living 2 seconds in the future. Because their vision is blurred by those violent vibrations we talked about, the pilot actually steers using their somatosensory system. They're feeling the micro-deviations in gravitational pressure through their lower back and their feet. They can sense the ice slipping milliseconds before it actually happens. When they actually do use their eyes, they employ what neurologists call the quiet eye, or the 2-second gaze. Because again, vision isn't for steering here. It merely syncs their internal procedural memory with physical reality. So while their body is being brutally compressed by 5 Gs in the current turn, their eyes are already deadlocked on the exit of the next turn. They are fixating completely, 100%, on the future.
All right, shifting gears to Section 5, Precision Engineering, the mechanics of speed.
Since the human body can only do so much, the bobsleigh itself has to act as this ultimate, highly engineered survival cell to protect its biological cargo and just slice through the air. A huge part of this engineering comes down to the runners, those steel blades actually touching the ice. The exact composition of the steel? That's a closely guarded industrial secret. But before every race, teams obsessively polish them. I mean, obsessively. They go from a 400 grit coarse polish all the way down to a 2000 grit mirror finish, sometimes adding precise microgrooves and fluorinated waxes depending on the exact temperature of the ice that day. One single wrong polish and the friction ruins the whole run. And then, of course, there's aerodynamics. A Formula One car has a drag coefficient of about 0.7, mainly because it needs downforce to grip the track. Your regular car is about 0.30. A bobsleigh? An incredibly slick 0.15. It is wildly aerodynamic. The margins are so extreme here that if an athlete sitting in the back lets their head poke up just 3 centimeters out of alignment, the resulting air drag will cost them hundreds of a second. And in this sport, that costs you the gold medal. Which leads us to our final section, Section 6, Kinexa and Mastering the Chaos. So, we've seen the raw power, the brain-bending neuroscience, and the obsessive engineering. Now, let's slow things down for just a moment and pivot to the core metaphor that Dr. Christophe Delong and Kinexa really want to present today. Because, this isn't just about winter sports. Think about the bobsleigh as a survival cell. In so many ways, this perfectly mirrors how we navigate life's challenges. Sometimes our own personal spaces, our daily routines, or even a personal vehicle acting as a mobile refuge, they serve as our own survival cells. Sure, they are constrained spaces, but they are the exact tools that grant us independence, freedom, and the ability to just stay in the race when the world around us becomes incredibly harsh and unforgiving. And just like that pilot navigating the treacherous ice, we all have to balance these two core concepts, the learned schema versus real-time control. We absolutely need our automatic, robust routines to handle the baseline stress of survival. But as Bob Staubel from Kinexa points out, we also need tools that give us precise, real-time control to make reactive adjustments when total unpredictability hits. You have to have an automated system to handle the chaos so you can free up your mind to remain responsive to the road ahead. This leads us to a truly profound takeaway, both from the ice track and for our daily lives. Mastering the invisible is what gives you strength. You see, true resilience doesn't come from micromanaging every single tiny bump in the road. It comes from trusting your procedural memory, trusting your hard-earned intuition, and trusting the engineered tools around you when you are inevitably forced to fly blind through life's sharpest, most dangerous turns. Which leaves us with this pretty provocative question to end on. Think about it. If an athlete can train their brain to trust a learned schema, navigating blindly down a treacherous ice chute at 140 kilometers per hour, how are you setting up your own systems? How can an advanced tool like Conexa act as your automated control system, helping you gracefully navigate the high-speed chaos of your own life? It's something to deeply reflect on as you manage your own descent. Thank you so much for joining us for this explainer, and we will definitely see you next time.